Greetings, leaders. I'm here to talk to you about Anchor. If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. It's free. There are creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone and or computer. Now, how convenient is that? Anchor will distribute your podcast for you, so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. You can make money from your podcast, too, with no minimum listenership. So it's everything that you need to make a podcast in one place. So do me a favor. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. I look forward to seeing the greatness within you. Greetings, leaders. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Leadership Is Podcast. I am your host, Jason Muhammad, founder of JM Leadership Consulting. In this episode, we're going to be talking about 3 keys to build influence. And it's going to be a 3-part series. And this part is part 1, the failure factor. Why leaders should embrace it and not run from it. Thank you. Greetings, leaders. Thank you for joining Leadership Is Podcast. So today we're going to be talking about 3 keys to build influence. And this podcast is going to be a 3-part series. The first part is, of course, embrace the failure factor. The part 2 is going to be serve the people or service. And number 3, it's building impactful relationships. So these are my 3 keys to building influence for leaders. I'm going to start off with Lolly Daskal, who's the author of the book, The Leadership Gap. And Lolly Daskal talks about 7 fears that every leader has, right? So there are 7 leaders that every leader has. And the first one is the fear of being an imposter. The second one is the fear of criticism. Then there's the fear of failure. There's the fear of being seen as a bad communicator. There's the fear of being seen as making bad decisions. There's fear of not being responsible. And number 7 is the fear of not getting work done. So we want to talk about how fear plays a part in failure, because many people have the wrong mindset as it relates to failure on their road or journey to success, on our road and journey to success. But one thing you must keep in mind that fear or failure, is a part of success. It cannot be separated from success. Failure is a part of success. For instance, when we were children, babies, adolescents, right, toddlers rather, and I have 5, so I've seen it done, 5 times. When a baby is striving to learn how to walk, it starts off, scooting across the floor, and then it starts crawling. And then all of a sudden it starts noticing things that are sturdy or more secure within the room or the house, apartment, or whatever you may live in. And it starts pulling itself up on those items, right? To give itself more stability. And so then what happens is it starts practicing how to walk by holding on to that sturdy thing, to that more secure item, right? A piece of furniture or what, kitchen counter or whatever it is, until it builds up the proper muscles for balance in the legs, ankles, and feet, but also the muscle memory in the mind so that it remembers just how to flex and balance when learning how to walk. So a baby that's learning how to walk, when it falls down, it doesn't say, you know what, I quit. This walking thing is not for me. No, that baby learns how to pull itself up on something sturdy and then start the process of walking. So failure is a part of success. Failure is a part of your journey. Lolly Daskal talks about the 7 fears that every leader has, and I want to talk about number 3, the fear of failure. Right? The fear of failure. To be afraid of failure actually produces failure. To just be honest with you and transparent with you, right? But we're talking about the failure factor. See, the failure factor, and that works both positive, negative, gaining or gaining or losing, right? A factor is a circumstance, fact, or influence that contributes to a result or outcome. The failure factor. If we do not embrace failure as a part of success, that not embracing it actually produces a failure that we have a fear of. But the question is, why do people fear failure? Many leaders and people in general equate failure with something of shame and humiliation. Something of shame and humiliation. And guess what? 90% of the time, that only plays into the ego. That's why we feel that shame and that humiliation is because of the ego. See, it lends back to Patrick Lencioni's 5 dysfunctions of a team, where he talks about how the leaders must have the first dysfunction of a team is the lack of trust. And this trust is not the type of trust that if you fall back, someone is going to catch me, but it's vulnerability trust. It's transparent trust, right? It's when you ask a leader a question and the leader may not know, and the leader is bold enough, has enough integrity to say, I don't know. See, that's a transparent leader. That's not one that is trying to put on a facade as if they know everything, right? Even though leaders are held accountable for what they know and achieving outcomes and goals. However, being a transparent leader is one that, of course, can build a transparent team, and that will make your team members willing to come to you with suggestions and also with ideas or complaints. Okay, so but the fear of failure is there simply because we do not want to be seen like an imposter or bad communicator or making bad decisions, not getting work done, not being responsible, and fear of the criticism. So the fear of failure, right? Zig Ziglar has it where he has stated using the word fear as an acronym, and I too use fear as an acronym. I use a lot of acronyms as it relates to teaching and training with my leadership mindset shift trainings, right? Because I don't want to change your dictionary. I want to expand. I don't want to change your vocabulary. Rather, I do want to expand your dictionary. You see, I want to expand your dictionary because your vocabulary, many of us use words like fear and focus and goals and leadership, and we use those words every day. But when I break those words down into acronyms, right, it expands its meaning. So that's what helps me with gaining more insight as it relates to our leadership vocabulary that we use. So Zig Ziglar says fear is it's when you have false evidence appearing real. False evidence appearing real. When things look like one way, but when they actually could be a totally different way, right? And we talked about this as it relates to mindset, and there's something that's called the reticular activating system that is in the brain that when you start focusing on something like you want to do this, or that's positive, right? But then when you start focusing on something negative, like why they don't like me and this and that, and you're focusing on that so much, it produces what is called confirmation bias, which means you start actually seeing signs that which you are focusing on so much actually exists. This is why we talk about, factor, meaning that it's a circumstance or a factor or influence that contributes to a result or an outcome. In other words, that which you fear, you can actually bring into existence by attracting that into existence. So be very careful with that which you fear or think about a lot. False evidence appearing real. So if you're going to have fear, then I use fear as an acronym that stands for focus everything around results, right? focus everything around results. Stephen Covey talks about it when he says, start with the end in mind. So when you're planning, when you're having your planning sessions, right, you can even term them as fear sessions. Because when you're setting goals that are so big and huge that you've never achieved before, but they are authentic goals that have your DNA in them, but they're huge, right? These are large undertakings that you've never done before. It can produce a little timidness within yourself or a little fear within yourself. But if you're going to have that fear, which is false evidence appearing real, fight it with another fear. Focus everything around results. Look at the results that you want in your life, in your journey, in your leadership, especially as emerging leaders or new leaders or even challenging leaders and high potential employees. So I want to read something from this book. I met this young lady in Charlotte, North Carolina when I was there at the Black Enterprise Forward networking event. Back in, I think it was 2018. And she's written a book that is entitled The CEO Life. And in this book, in chapter 1, she has it, The CEO Struggle. On page 44, if you have a chance to purchase her book, I would really suggest you do. The author's name is T. Renee Smith. And the book is entitled The CEO Life. She says, fear occurs as a response to something perceived as threatening, scary, dangerous, or harmful. Fear of danger, failure, rejection, judgment, loss of money, and loss of a relationship are common. However, failure is not fatal. It's only feedback. If you're going to succeed, you're going to have to fail. Let me repeat that, because if you're going to succeed, you're going to have to fail. There is no way around that. Here's another example of that. Bodybuilders who go into the gym to work their bodies, right? You know the reason why they are so big? Because they work those muscles to failure. But then there are two other components that come along with that failure, working that muscle to failure. There is their diet, and then there is their rest, right? So there are other components that go along with that. But failure is how they actually build those great muscles. And so she says here that if you're going to succeed, you're going to have to fail. She says that failure is not fatal, it's only feedback, right? You won't get everything right, so you have to step outside your comfort zone and know you're strong enough to handle whatever results you get, positive or negative. See, we're talking about a good relationship with fear as well, or with failure as well. You got to have a good relationship with failure. Most of us have a negative relationship with failure, okay? So typically we have one of these three reactions as it relates to fear. She says, fight. You look at the situation aggressively and fight to control the outcome. Then there's flight. F-L-I-G-H-T. Flight. Meaning that you avoid facing the situation altogether and physically or figuratively run away. And then the third one, she says, is freeze. You find yourself paralyzed in the situation and unable to take any action at all. In some cases, healthy fear can motivate you if it propels you to have sense of urgency to accomplish your goals. For instance, you work to launch your business because you fear being the last to market. If you have a healthy relationship with fear, this can be positive. However, if you have a negative relationship with fear, such as fear of success, and we're talking about here fear of failure or fear of missing out, or the fear of rejection even, that can paralyze you and you'll never get to launch yourself, your business off the ground. So failure is only feedback. And if you're going to succeed, you're going to have to fail. That's just simply a part of what that is. It's just simply a part of it, right? Failure is, as Winston Churchill says, that success is not final, failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that matters. Now, one of the great minds in our time is Brian Tracy, a New York Times bestselling author. He's written a book that's entitled Change Your Thinking, Change Your Life: How to Unlock Your Full Potential for Success and Achievement. And so in reading his book, right, he has it on page 232 in his book that's talking about risk of failure and facing your fears. This is very interesting as I was reading this, and it really goes right into the mindset that a leader must have, right, as it relates to taking risk. Because if you're going to be a leader, if you're going to be one that's leading people, the first thing you have to have is vision. And with that vision, baked in having vision is the ability to take risk. So you got to be willing to take some risk here. So when he talks about the risk failure, right, he says you need the courage to risk failure. You need the courage to endure constant setbacks, disappointments, and temporary defeats. And here's the key that matches right along with what T. Renee Smith has in her book, The CEO Life, when she says that, if you're going to succeed, you must fail. Brian Tracy says in his book here, you need the courage to treat failure as an opportunity to more intelligently begin again. He says you need to learn to deal with failure by realizing that it is an indispensable prerequisite for success. Indispensable means you cannot do away with it. It is invaluable. The value of it is so much that you can never really pay for it. It's something that you cannot disregard or ignore. It is an indispensable prerequisite for success. What is a prerequisite for success? An indispensable prerequisite for success? Learning to deal with failure by realizing that it is an indispensable prerequisite for success. He says you need the courage to treat failure as an opportunity to more intelligently begin again. You need to overcome the fear of failure by doing the things you fear over and over and over again. Then by resolving to bounce rather than break when things don't work out for you, right? You have the bounce factor instead of the break factor. See, when things don't quite work out for you, you'll be able to bounce back and not break. It's just like the rubber tree, right? You'll be able to not just break in the wind there, but you will have your flexibility, right? You'll have that bendability. So here's the other part. He says face your fears. You need the courage to turn toward danger continuously. Identify all the fear situations in your life that cause you stress or anxiety today. Decide what the worst possible outcome of each of these situations might be. Resolve to accept the worst should it occur, and then take action to resolve each of those situations. Refuse to allow fear of a situation to remain in your life, dominating your thinking and emotions and holding you back. If you know what is holding you back, challenge it. If fear of failure is what's holding you back, challenge it. I'm going to give you an example of that. Will Smith, when he was doing the skydive, right, he talked about how he met with a group of his friends and they were talking about going skydiving, and he was like, yeah, let's all go do that. Yeah, let's do that. Let's do that. But then he said that night after he left from meeting with them, he was tossing and turning, and he was really concerned about that whole skydiving thing. And he says, but then he started thinking, like, you don't have to do this. Like, you can say, I'm not going to do it. or you can just not show up. But then he said, maybe, we were all drinking a little bit, so maybe they all forgot. And so he showed up to the spot to where they all said they would do it, and all of them were there doing it, right? and so he was kind of, shocked by that a little, and still kind of timid, still worried a little bit about doing this thing. But, again, what did he do? He faced his fear, and he got into the plane. Now, what they do is when you're getting ready to skydive, they count to 3, but they push you out in 2 because they know that you're going to grab the thing, right, before you actually go out. And so they were counting 1, and then at 2, they pushed him out. And he said that at the most dangerous, vulnerable time in his life was the most blissful, because what he did was he conquered his fear, and he was able to see the beauty of that which he agreed to do. And that's how we have to do. We have to be able to learn how to fail. And so I have 4 ways here of how we can actually fail, right? And I want to talk about those ways. So the first one is you want to first study where you stumbled. So I have, again, remember, acronyms, right, that I use to not change your vocabulary but expand your dictionary. So the F stands for first study where you stumbled. Then the A is accept the truth of what caused you to stumble. The I is to investigate options and then install those options. What does that mean? That means that once you investigate options that you could have used instead of what you did use that caused you to stumble, investigate more options and what you can do the next time, and then install those options into your planning of the next event, meeting, check-in, all of the things that leaders do. Right? Investigate the options and install those options. And then next is you learn from that and then you leverage based on that. Okay? So 4 ways of how you can actually fail is you first study where you stumble, accept the truth of where you stumble, investigate and install the options that you have investigated, and then you learn and leverage. Now, guess what? How that builds your influence, right? How does the failure factor build your influence? Well, it produces 3 things. Number 1, it produces trust, it produces credibility, and it produces fortitude. Right? You'll be able to handle things, because now what's happening is you're building that muscle memory, you're building that thick-skinnedness from learning from your mistakes and mishaps that you went through as you were on your journey, as us, on our journey to success. Remember, failure is an indispensable prerequisite for success. So says Brian Tracy. T. Renee Smith of the CEO Life says that failure is a part of success. Failure is feedback. I remember my mentor, Sandra Grace, tells me all the time when I'm doing something, study, the events that I put on, study the books that I've written, right? Get the data from it. Journal my whole journey so that I can get the data from that journey, right? So failure is feedback. And if you're going to fail forward, fall forward, and fail forward. And you FAIL, first study where you stumble. Accept the truth of where you stumbled. Investigate options and install options. Then learn and leverage, right, from those options that you're actually going to install. And so if you fail in that way, what that produces in your team, in your organization, in your agency is they will look at you with trust, credibility, and fortitude, and that is what builds your influence as it relates to the failure factor. So listen, thank you so much for listening to this episode of Leadership Is Podcast. Greetings, leaders. Thank you for enjoying another episode of Leadership Is Podcast. I am your host, Jason A. Muhammad, founder of JM Leadership Consulting. You can follow us at Twitter at Leadership JM, LinkedIn, Jason A. Muhammad, Facebook, JM Leadership Consulting, Instagram, JM Leadership Consulting. And of course, you can follow this podcast on Anchor at Anchor.fm. Make sure that you share this out. This information is extremely important, especially for emerging leaders. As Brian Tracy says, that failure is a prerequisite for success.